really helpful when you went through the boxes on the tree. I thought that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad you all got a lot out of that. Like I said, I'm going to do another one of these this week to walk you through the rest of the tree and how they build. And one thing we've talked about is that, yes, it does take, it takes a lot of time and practice, but after you've kind of gotten your feet wet with UBD and you get a little more experience under your belt, you'll see that it actually saves you. It seems like a lot of work, but it saves you a lot of stress and work in the long run, because you know that your materials, the things that you're planning for your class, your assessments and things like that, in the end all come together and fit instead of being just kind of haphazard. So here are some things that we have for essential questions, just to look at, you know, when you're crafting your essential questions, in what ways are learning math or science and doing math and science the same? So look at things like how much time you spend answering questions, or how much time you spend questioning the answers. You know, one of the big focuses now is not just on getting the answer, it's about how and why you got the answer. Have you seen any of that in your curriculum and your discussions with your clinical teachers?
Sorry, seen any of what? I didn't quite get that.
Well,
questioning their answers.
Yes, looking at the why and the how of what you're doing instead of just the old way of, okay, let's memorize, let's do these steps, you know, here's the answer.
I think in science, with them being able to do so many labs and hands-on activities, that really gives them a chance to apply what they're learning and to figure out the hows and whys for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like having the block schedule at Mesquite and actually them having time to do that.
And do you talk about how things work the way they do?
Yeah.
I think we're cutting out again. I am so sorry that everything's a little quirky tonight. I know it's weather related, but I appreciate you all for bearing with me tonight. So what I want to look at before we go is some types of essential questions to help you with your refining in the next module. Remember I said in the video that there are overarching and topical questions. So one thing that we quite often focus on is these topical questions. And the topical questions are things like those student-friendly learning targets that we turn into a question to help our students understand what our goals are. So things like, what are molecules, you know, compare and contrast photosynthesis and cellular respiration, you know, when are estimates appropriate as measurements, things like that would be parts of an overarching question. But when we're really getting into these essential questions, we want to look at enduring understandings, those overarching questions that really carry us through several lessons or even an entire unit. So we're looking at big questions that kind of form the glue that pull all of our concepts that we're teaching in a unit together. So notice some examples. We have, how is math the language of science? So that would be my overarching question. And could you think of any questions, any topical questions that would fit into that overarching question in a unit?
Say that again, Dr. Glaze. How topical questions that would.
Nope.
Yep. Dr. Glaze.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, I can hear you now. Can you say the last part of that question? I lost.
So an example of an overarching question here is, how is math the language of science? So what would be some topical, those specific subparts that would enable us to teach students how science or how mathematics is the language of science? So what are some subtopics, some questions that would form goals to help teach that math is the language of science?
Well, you could calculate things like mass of an object, and that's math, but it also relates to science.
What are some other examples?
You
I think
couldn't,
like cell replication and exponential growth.
You can talk about like haploid and diploid cells.
Okay, excellent. What
You
about
could-
coding?
I think graphs, you couldn't put graphs in there and the topical question, and that's a way to relate numbers with science.
In the labs, when you're weighing and measuring and using your beakers and
See, this
In
is
geology.
exactly. Oh, sorry, Kit. Go ahead.
Oh, well, in geology, one of the things that is using seismic to determine the distance to an earthquake and the specific location of an earthquake, the epicenter. And so you're doing a rate of different types of earthquake waves and a lag time differences basically to figure it out. It's a lot of fun to do.
So would you say that coming up with your topical questions once you have those essentials, it's probably easier, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
It's just a matter of trying to frame those essentials and find those enduring understandings. And there was something really interesting that I read the other day regarding those enduring understandings, and that was that, do you remember that picture of the three circles together that we talked about last week? And we talked about there being, things that are important to know and things that we want them to take with them, and then things that we want them to take forever.
Yes.
Those are on.
It quantified that in a really neat way, because it said that, to me, it said that the things that are important for them to know, that big outer circle, are the things we want them to remember for 40 days. So those are things we want them to remember on the test. The things that we want them to take with them are things that we want them to hold on to for 40 months. We want that to carry them through their next few years of school. And then those enduring understandings are the things we want them to take with them for 40 years. So I just thought that was a very interesting conceptualization of that circular framework for UBD. So think on that for a minute. 40 days, 40 months, and 40 years. It kind of puts things in a different perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
long time.
Yeah.
Is this one?
Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes, 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 yes.
It's also at the bottom of the tree chart. It's down here.
Yes, it is, in that bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah, that's a neat concept.
So we have on the outside our 40 days, and then within that we have our 40 months, and then we have finally in the middle we have our 40 years. So here we have things that are important for them to know on the outside. Then towards the middle we have things that we need for them to remember throughout their time in school, so 40 months. And then on the middle, in the very inside, we have the things that we want them to know to carry with them for 40 years. So if you think about this in terms of math or in terms of science, we may want them to know for our test that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are complementary processes. We may want them to know those formulas. But 40 years down the road, are we really concerned about them still knowing what the formulas are for those chemical processes?
Not particularly.
Unless they're scientists.
Well, if they're a scientist, they'd better know it, right?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, what we want them to carry with them 40 years from now is that science really is not the enemy, that science is a logical way of seeing the world, that science is a physical explanation of the world, that mathematics is the language of science, and that math allows us to describe the world around us in numbers, right? It's not necessarily we want them to memorize the quadratic equation. So for me, that, I just wanted to share that with you all, because I thought, that really puts a new spin on that diagram. And I've seen that diagram 100 times, and I've never really thought about it in terms of 40 days, 40 months and 40 years.
Hello?
I think that really ties into the understanding
Yes.
versus knowing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And think about this. If you tie this back into Bloom's taxonomy, I would put in that outer ring things like knowledge and understanding. In that middle ring, that would be things like application and analysis. And then that very inner ring, to me, would be synthesis and evaluation. Because if you can synthesize and evaluate something, you've got an understanding of not only the workings and the specific knowledge, but the purpose of that knowledge as well and the impact. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's just another way to think about it. So another thing to help you with your essentials is this. Remember that essential questions have no single obvious right answer. That's the big thing. If you can answer your question like a test question, then it's not really an overarching essential question, because we want it to be something that's thought-provoking, something that leads to more questions and more discussion, something that connects us across content areas, and just we're looking for patterns. So notice it says recur naturally. Things like how math is the language of science. If you look at the examples you all gave earlier about how it's present in data and graphs, it's used in various fields of science to take measurements, to determine relationships, to calculate speed, all of these different things. That question, that essential question, that enduring understanding is something that recurs naturally in a pattern as we're talking about math and science and how the two intertwine. So these are some things, just some quick guidelines to help you write essential questions. So they have no single answer, no single obvious correct answer. They're framed to provoke or sustain student interest. They raise important questions across content, reflect our conceptual priorities. So this ties back to those 3 circles. They're reflections of those enduring understandings, not just basic knowledge and understanding for the test. And then they recur naturally. So they're a pattern that we see in our subject matter. Okay, so we're going to talk about one more thing, and then I'm going to quit harassing you guys for the evening. Somebody's got a happy puppy. So what did you think about our assignments so far for this module looking at prescribed and emergent curriculum? Just share your thoughts with me for a minute.
I like it because it's, at least in high school, we have a prescribed in biology. So I was able to relate to it really, really easy.
How prescribed is your curriculum in biology?
Very.
Very prescribed.
Everything from PowerPoint, worksheets, tests, everything.
So you're completely scripted.
Yep.
Wow.
We can make some changes on the worksheets, and if we don't like the worksheets or the tests, we could rewrite them. However, we need to give those tests that particular day as everyone else in the district.
I see the benefits of we're all on the same page, and any student could go get tutoring from any other teacher. Well, there's a lot of benefits to it, but it does feel somewhat robotic.
Does it make you think about that school that I was telling you about a few weeks ago when we talked about the entire system now being done on MacBooks and where the teachers are basically facilitators? You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember it.
I mean, I think the teachers are still putting their instructional spin on the prescribed curriculum. You know, you might see one teacher and they do it one way, and another teacher is going to teach it a different way, even though they're teaching the same material.
I think it allows them the opportunity to focus on the presentation instead of,
Yeah.
getting the curriculum together. So I see a lot of positives in it.
Excellent. Does anybody have an emergence or seen, has anyone seen a more emergent curriculum in their classroom settings?
Janisa?
Yes.
Janice, I think Janice has seen like more emergent curriculum than we have, and I think now Jaime.
I think now the teacher I'm with now is more prescribed. Like I went to planning with them today, and it was literally pulled from, what was it, Eduphoria? Pulled straight from over there. So so far it's really boring. So hopefully she makes some changes or something.
Who are you with now?
Miss Hughes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she ain't gonna change it.
I've heard from Dr. Walker that the Mesquite in general has a very prescribed curriculum. So if you get to see a bit of emergent or relaxed prescription, you're seeing something different.
Well, I noticed that with the non-tested subjects, like even in chemistry, the pre-AP, they're a little more laid back than within biology because they don't have the checkpoint.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's very interesting.
So
And I've heard the same about Mesquite ISD, that they have a very prescribed curriculum.
What did Sheree just say? Her comments go so fast I can't see them. Did anybody?
Oh, you can put down on the chat, Amy, and see them.
Acceleration courses seem to be more emergent. Where are you guys? Oh, hold on.
Joe, why should we go?
Wait now.
Never mind.
I watched that video at the beginning of our
Module?
yes, thank you, module. And I totally want to teach at a school like that. I started looking up, it talked about other schools that follow that model, and there's one in Capel, and yeah,
Yep.
I totally
There's
want to teach there.
several in the Dallas area, Amy. I looked up those too, and there's also a bunch in Austin. Not a bunch, but some.
Yeah, that looks like an amazing place to work and to go to school.
And it's pretty cool. And Sherade, you're right. Acceleration courses do tend to be more emergent because the purpose of accelerated courses is very different from the purpose of our general courses, because our general courses serve the purpose of preparing students for entry into the workforce or entry into college, and usually have that standardized testing. But by admission, the entire goal of our AP courses is to increase the rigor and push critical thinking on students. So if our goal is critical thinking and increase rigor and level of intensity, then, it would seem that emergent curriculum has a lot of options for that. Because if you think about it, that emergent curriculum is where we start digging into critical problem solving and deviation of thought processes where there is no right answer. Students are kind of on their own path. I encourage you, and I cannot remember the name of the system now, but in Silicon Valley of all places, they have a school whose emergent curriculum has gone non-technology. So they're doing all of these advanced concepts and things like that in these incredibly advanced courses in geometry and computer programming and things like that. And they're doing it all by hand to encourage the students to, to encourage their students to think without using that, kind of using technology as a crutch. Because yes, it's a beautiful tool, it's incredible, we have the world at our fingertips, but at the same time they're saying, well, is it possible that this is a crutch that's actually stifling critical thinking as opposed to encouraging it? So I thought that was very interesting.
I have one observation. I don't know if we're winding down yet or not, but in the article that you showed, Dr. Our Proud Heritage, The Emergence of Emergent Curriculum by Elizabeth Jones, it looks like this.
Yes.
Anyway, there's a neat connection for the TRES people to know. On page 2 of that article, there's a book that was written in 1994 by John Nemo. It's called Emergent Curriculum. And he did his doctoral research in Reggio Emilia, Italy. And this Reggio Emilia approach is one that's highly endorsed by Dr. Foote, who's our department chair. You've met her. And in fact, those projects that you were looking at the beginning of the semester and not understanding what you were supposed to say about them, those were Reggio Emilia inspired projects. And so the idea here, so look up Reggio Emilia and you'll understand more about where Dr. Foote and Dr. Walker are coming from. The Reggio Emilia preschool in the 90s, it says children's active learning and play and work on an emergency curriculum built on the strengths of the child. And then, so the whole idea is watching the children and the curriculum emerges. It's kind of the way other end of the spectrum from the highly prescriptive curriculum. But anyway, that's where Drs. Walker and Foote are coming from, and that explains in part some of the amorphous feeling I think that you're sensing in that course.
And that does make sense because, you know, when we start talking about emergent curriculum, the true emergent curriculum really is amorphous like that because it's a student-to-student thing. In a truly emergent curriculum school, there are no grade levels.
Right. So anyway, for the TRES people, if you haven't looked at the article yet, The Emergence of Emergent Curriculum by Elizabeth Jones, it's one of the 3 that Dr. Glaze noted for us. And it's a short article, but read through that and it'll help frame your research course that you're doing with Dr. Walker a little bit.
Hints and tips from out of nowhere.
I know.
You had no idea that reading in your curriculum course would help you on your final projects. But thank you for sharing that, Kid. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure they do as well.
Such a unique situation here. It's just really a blast as a returning student.
Okay, so did anyone, before we dismiss for the night, does anyone have any questions or want to share anything else about what they've come through with this module or so far in the course?
I think this module was very interesting, but it was very deep also. Some of it I have to reread it again to make sense for me, but it was very interesting.
Well, I hope that you would enjoy this module because it kind of digs into some of the different areas of curriculum. We're going to continue this in our next module because we're going to be talking about the hidden curriculum as well. So that's going to be very important in terms of social and moral development of students and how that ties into the curriculum. So there are all kinds of things hidden in our standards, in our curriculum, and what we're teaching that we often don't even think about. So I hope to continue to explore some of these things as we progress through the modules.
Yeah,
I found go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I found in my post that I just posted today, the SAGE publication. I can't find the root of this publication, but it's chapter 1, the nature of curriculum. It's got some neat stuff on hidden curriculum. Maybe that's something you'll reference, Dr. Glaze, but it was really interesting. Joe, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I found it very interesting. What was that?
Almost done. I'll get it a second.
I just was going to say that the prescribed curriculum, I didn't really think about it like naming that type of curriculum and emerged curriculum. Like, it's kind of funny how we only sort of think about prescribed as being like medicine or something that you have to do, and it's almost kind of painful. The word's kind of painful when someone prescribes you something, and I just found that very interesting that they would name that style of curriculum like prescribed. Does that make sense, or am I just going in circles?
No, labeling is carries huge connotations, and I think either one of the terms for it, either prescribed or constrained, both sound like you're being held back or forced to do something. So you're correct. That makes perfect sense.
It's not all bad either. So
Yeah, it's not all bad, but I mean, usually when we talk about prescribed, we're talking about medicating something or trying to stimulate something, no matter how bitter. I just found that quite interesting how they made that connection. And when you're talking about emerging, like, we talk about emerging evolution, emerging change. It's more for like, it's more about an evolution. It's more about metamorphosis than it really is just a gradual, so to speak, change. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's how I looked at it. And I found it very interesting just reading the whole articles the 3 articles that you sent out for us to read. And I kind of made that connection on my own. Maybe it's just me being a weird and thinking about stuff, but I just thought that was really weird.
I think that's
really
nicely put. Anyone else want to contribute before we sign off?
I have a question about the UBD tree.
Yes.
When like we're working on it now, we're filling in the second part. If we see changes that we want to make, like in the beginning, like find better questions, can we change those or do they have to stay the same?
No, that's the great thing about UBD and really any kind of curriculum design. If you're being a reflective practitioner, which is what I want you to be, you're continually going back and changing and tweaking and pulling things that don't work, because that's how you figure things out. So no, you are absolutely welcome to make changes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anybody want some cake?
Yes, bring me cake.
That is extremely mean to ask whenever you can't give us any. That's all.
Wow.
We have so much cake and brownies over here.
Yeah, but they're over there. There's no good in us having it.
I might.
All right, so y'all ready?
Okay, I am going to turn off our